What happens when Hollywood's most beloved star meets television's most controversial host? What you're about to witness is one of the most explosive celebrity meltdowns ever caught on live television. Dwayne Johnson, known for his calm demeanor and positive attitude, completely loses his composure during what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. The man who built his career on respect and professionalism finds himself in a verbal battle that will leave you speechless. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral out of control when egos clash and boundaries are crossed. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to want to miss a single word of what happened next. The morning started like any other at the View studio in New York City. Dwayne Johnson had arrived early, as he always did, wearing his signature black t-shirt and jeans, flashing that million-dollar smile that had made him one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. He was there to promote his latest action blockbuster, a film that had already broken several box office records in its opening weekend. The Rock, as fans knew him, had done hundreds of interviews throughout his career, from his wrestling days to his transition into movies. And he prided himself on being professional, gracious, and always putting the audience first. As he sat in the green room, sipping his morning coffee and reviewing his talking points with his publicist, everything seemed perfectly normal. The other hosts of The View had already greeted him warmly, with Whoopi Goldberg giving him a friendly hug and telling him how excited she was to have him on the show. Sarah Haynes had complimented his recent charitable work with underprivileged youth. And even the usually reserved Ana Navarro had smiled and made small talk about his latest film project. But Joy Behar, the veteran host known for her sharp tongue and controversial opinions, had been noticeably absent from these pleasantries. When the show went live, Johnson walked onto the set with his usual confidence, waving to the audience and embracing each host as the crowd erupted in applause. He took his seat next to Joy Behar, who offered him a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The interview began smoothly enough, with Whoopi asking about his training regimen and his transition from wrestling to acting. Johnson answered with his characteristic charm, telling stories that had the audience laughing and the other hosts nodding appreciatively. But then it was Joy Behar's turn to ask questions, and the atmosphere in the studio began to shift. She leaned forward in her chair, her expression serious as she shuffled through her notes. "Dwayne," she began, her voice carrying a tone that was noticeably different from the friendly banter that had preceded her. "I want to talk about something that's been bothering me about your recent comments regarding work ethic and success." Johnson's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Sure, Joy. What would you like to know?" "Well," Behar continued, her voice growing sharper, "you've been going around telling people that anyone can achieve success if they just work hard enough. But don't you think that's a bit naive? I mean, you came from a wrestling family. You had connections. You had advantages that most people don't have. Isn't it a little insulting to suggest that people who are struggling just aren't working hard enough?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Johnson could feel the energy in the room change. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and even the audience seemed to sense that something was off. This wasn't the kind of softball question he was used to getting during promotional interviews. "I think there might be a misunderstanding here, Joy," Johnson replied, his voice still controlled, but with a slight edge creeping in. "I've never said that success is only about hard work. I've always acknowledged that I've been fortunate and that I've had support along the way. But I do believe that hard work is essential, and I think most people would agree with that." But Behar wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, a smug expression crossing her face. "Oh, come on, Dwayne. Let's be honest here. You've made millions of dollars telling people to follow their dreams and work hard, but you're selling them a fantasy. Most people who work hard their entire lives never get anywhere close to your level of success. Don't you think you have a responsibility to be more honest about that?" The accusation hit Johnson like a physical blow. His jaw tightened, and for the first time in the interview, his famous smile completely disappeared. The other hosts looked stunned, with Whoopi actually turning to stare at Behar in disbelief. The audience, which had been enthusiastic and supportive just moments before, fell into an uncomfortable silence. "I think you're mischaracterizing what I've said," Johnson replied, his voice now noticeably strained. "I've always been transparent about my journey, including the failures and setbacks. I've never promised anyone that hard work guarantees success, but I do believe it's necessary. And frankly, I'm not sure why you're trying to turn this into something negative." But Joy Behar was just getting started. She had clearly come prepared for this moment, and she wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away. Negative, she repeated, her voice rising. I think what's negative is giving people false hope. I think what's negative is pretending that the American dream is still alive and well, when we know that social mobility is at an all-time low. You're selling people a lie, Dwayne, and you're getting rich doing it. The words hung in the air like a slap across the face. Johnson's hands, which had been resting calmly on his lap, now gripped the arms of his chair. His breathing had become more pronounced, and the famous composure that had carried him through countless interviews was beginning to crack. The other hosts were exchanging worried glances, and even the camera operators seemed to sense that something unprecedented was happening. Joy, Johnson said, his voice now barely controlled. I came here to talk about my movie, to have a pleasant conversation with you and your colleagues, and to connect with the audience. I don't know why you're attacking me or what you're trying to accomplish here, but this isn't what I signed up for. But Behar wasn't. By his discomfort, like a predator that had caught the scent of weakness. This is exactly what you signed up for, Dwayne. You signed up to be a public figure, to influence people, to take their money. And with that comes responsibility. You can't just spout motivational nonsense and then hide behind your movie promotions when someone calls you out on it. The tension in the studio was now palpable. The audience had gone from uncomfortable silence to an almost electric anticipation, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Johnson's publicist, watching from the wings, was frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming a disaster. Johnson took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain his composure, but the damage was already done. The careful facade of the promotional interview had been shattered, and both he and Behar knew that there was no going back. The man who had built his entire brand on positivity and inspiration was about to show a side of himself that the public had never seen before. You know what, Joy? Johnson said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. I think I'm beginning to understand what this is really about. You know what, Joy? Johnson said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. I think I'm beginning to understand what this is really about. Behar's eyes narrowed, sensing that she had pushed the Hollywood superstar to a breaking point. But instead of backing down, she seemed to relish the moment. Oh, really? And what's that supposed to mean? Johnson leaned forward in his chair, his massive frame suddenly seeming even more imposing under the studio lights. This isn't about my message or my success or helping people. This is about you needing to tear someone down to make yourself feel relevant. This is about you taking shots at someone who's actually trying to make a positive difference in the world because it gets you attention. The studio felt deadly silent. Even the crew members who had been moving around behind the cameras froze in place. Whoopi Goldberg's eyes widened in shock while Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Ana Navarro sat perfectly still, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. But Joy Behar wasn't intimidated. If anything, Johnson's accusations seemed to fuel her fire. She straightened up in her chair, her voice becoming even more pointed. Relevant. Oh, that's rich coming from someone who's built his entire career on being fake. You want to talk about relevance? I've been speaking truth to power for decades while you've been playing dress up and pretending to be a hero. The words hit Johnson like a physical blow. His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually stand up from his chair. The camera operators instinctively zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression on his face as he struggled to maintain control. Fake, Johnson repeated, his voice now trembling with barely contained rage. You think I'm fake? You think the work I do with veterans is fake? You think the scholarships I provide for underprivileged kids are fake? You think the hours I spend visiting children's hospitals are fake? Behar waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away his words. Oh, please spare me the charity tour. Every celebrity does charity work. It's called public relations, Dwayne. What I'm talking about is your message, your brand, this whole positive thinking nonsense that you've been peddling. It's fake. It's harmful, and it's irresponsible. The other hosts were now looking genuinely alarmed. Whoopi cleared her throat, clearly trying to intervene. Maybe we should. No, Johnson interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. No, I want to hear this. I want to understand why Joy thinks that encouraging people to work hard and believe in themselves is somehow harmful. I want to know why she thinks that sharing my story and the lessons I've learned is irresponsible. Behar leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the fact that she had gotten such a strong reaction. Because your story isn't the norm, Dwayne. Your story is the exception. And when you go around telling people that they can achieve what you've achieved if they just believe in themselves and work hard enough, you're setting them up for failure. You're making them think that if they don't succeed, it's their fault for not working hard enough or not believing enough. Johnson's face was now flushed with anger. His usual calm demeanor completely shattered. So, what's the alternative, Joy? Should I tell people to give up? Should I tell them not to try? Should I tell them that they are destined to fail, so they might as well not even bother? You should tell them the truth, Behar shot back. You should tell them that success is largely determined by factors beyond their control. You should tell them that the system is rigged, that the deck is stacked against them, and that no amount of positive thinking is going to change that. The audience was now completely silent, transfixed by the verbal battle playing out before them. Some looked shocked, others appeared uncomfortable, but none could look away. This was no longer an interview. It was a philosophical war being waged in front of millions of viewers. Johnson stood up from his chair, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the table. The sudden movement caused a ripple of concern among the crew, and several security personnel moved closer to the set. "You know what your problem is, Joy," he said, his voice now booming across the studio. "You've become so cynical, so bitter that you can't stand to see someone actually trying to inspire people. You've given up on hope, so you want everyone else to give up, too." Behar also stood up. Though at barely 5'10" tall, she was dwarfed by Johnson's massive frame. But her voice was just as fierce. "Hope. You call what you're selling hope. I call it false advertising. I call it taking advantage of people's desperation. You're no different from a televangelist promising miracles to people who send in their last dollar." The comparison to a televangelist was clearly the final straw for Johnson. His face contorted with rage, and he took a step closer to Behar, causing her to instinctively step back. "How dare you?" he said, his voice now a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than if he had been shouting. "How dare you compare me to a con artist? How dare you suggest that I'm taking advantage of people?" The other hosts were now on their feet as well, with Whoopi moving between Johnson and Behar. Okay, let's all just take a breath here," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen plenty of heated moments on television. But Johnson wasn't finished. He pointed his finger directly at Behar, his voice rising again. "You want to know what's really irresponsible, Joy? What's irresponsible is telling people that they shouldn't even try. What's irresponsible is crushing dreams before they even have a chance to grow. What's irresponsible is spreading the kind of negativity and hopelessness that you've been peddling for years." Behar's face had turned red with anger, and she was no longer even trying to maintain the pretense of professional decorum. "Negativity. I'm being realistic. I'm being honest. Someone has to tell people the truth instead of feeding them fairy tales. Your truth," Johnson shot back, "is poison. Your truth is giving up before you even start. Your truth is accepting failure as inevitable. Well, I reject your truth, Joy. I reject everything you stand for." The studio was now in complete chaos. The producers were frantically trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial. The other hosts were attempting to restore order, and the audience was sitting in stunned silence, unsure of what they were witnessing. Some looked thrilled to be seeing such an unfiltered moment, while others appeared genuinely concerned that the situation might escalate beyond words. Behar, despite being significantly smaller than Johnson, showed no signs of backing down. "You reject my truth? Well, I reject your lies. I reject your superficial positivity. I reject your fake smile and your manufactured persona." Johnson's hands were now shaking with rage, and he had to consciously force himself to keep them at his sides. "At least I'm trying to help people, Joy. At least I'm trying to make the world a better place. All you do is tear people down, criticize, and spread misery. When was the last time you actually did something positive? When was the last time you lifted someone up instead of tearing them down?" The question seemed to hit Behar in a way that the previous attacks hadn't. For just a moment, her composure cracked and something resembling hurt flashed across her face. But she quickly recovered, her voice becoming even more venomous. "I lift people up by telling them the truth. Something you clearly wouldn't recognize if it hit you in your perfect face." Johnson laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless sound. "The truth. You wouldn't know the truth if it came with a script and a teleprompter. You've been living in your little bubble of privilege and cynicism for so long that you've forgotten what real people actually face every day." "Privilege?" Behar's voice cracked with indignation. "You're going to lecture me about privilege? You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You live in a mansion. You have people waiting on you hand and foot. And you're going to talk to me about privilege. The difference, Johnson said, his voice now deadly calm, is that I remember where I came from. I remember what it's like to struggle, to worry about paying rent, to wonder if you're going to make it. And instead of using that experience to crush other people's dreams, I use it to show them that things can get better. The tension in the room was so thick, it was almost suffocating. The crew members were exchanging worried glances, and several of them had their phones out, clearly ready to call for additional security if needed. The other hosts had given up trying to mediate and were simply watching in fascination and horror as two strong personalities clashed in the most public way possible. Behar's voice dropped to a whisper, but her words carried across the silent studio like a curse. You know what, Dwayne? I think you're scared. I think you're scared that deep down you know I'm right. I think you're scared that your whole message is built on a foundation of sand, and you can't handle anyone pointing that out. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Johnson's response would determine whether this confrontation would end or escalate to an even more dangerous level. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Johnson's response would determine whether this confrontation would end or escalate to an even more dangerous level. For a moment, Johnson stood perfectly still, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, with everyone in the studio holding their breath, waiting to see how Hollywood's most beloved star would react to such a direct and personal attack. Then something shifted in Johnson's expression. The anger that had been building throughout the interview suddenly transformed into something else entirely, something colder and more calculated. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward to hear every word. You know what, Joy? He said, his tone now eerily calm. You're absolutely right about one thing. I am scared. I'm scared that there are people like you in positions of influence. People who would rather tear down hope than build it up. I'm scared that your brand of toxic cynicism is what passes for wisdom in our culture. Behar opened her mouth to respond, but Johnson held up his hand, and the gesture was so commanding that she actually stopped speaking. But here's what I'm not scared of, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I'm not scared of the truth. The truth is that, yes, I've been incredibly fortunate. The truth is that success isn't guaranteed no matter how hard you work. But the truth is also that giving up guarantees failure. The truth is that hope, even false hope, is better than no hope at all. He took a step closer to Behar, his presence now dominating the entire studio. You want to know what's really scary, Joy? What's scary is that you've given up on people. You've decided that they are not worth believing in, not worth fighting for, not worth inspiring. You've appointed yourself the voice of reality, but your reality is just surrender dressed up as wisdom. The audience was completely transfixed. Some were recording on their phones. Others were simply staring in awe at this unprecedented display of raw emotion from one of Hollywood's most controlled personalities. Behar's face was now pale, but her voice still carried defiance. So, what are you saying, Dwayne? That I should just shut up and let you keep selling your fantasy? Johnson's laugh was sharp and bitter. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, you should ask yourself when you became so invested in proving that dreams don't come true. I'm saying that maybe you should wonder why you've made it your mission to convince people that they are destined to fail. Because they are. Behar shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. Most people are destined to fail, Dwayne. Most people will never achieve their dreams. And pretending otherwise is cruel. No, Johnson said, his voice now thundering across the studio. What's cruel is stealing someone's hope before they even have a chance to try. What's cruel is telling a kid from a broken home that they shouldn't bother dreaming of something better. What's cruel is convincing someone that they are powerless to change their circumstances. He leaned down so that he was at eye level with Behar, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. You know what the real difference is between us, Joy? When I see someone struggling, I want to help them find a way up. When you see someone struggling, you want to convince them that struggling is all they'll ever do. The words hit Behar like a physical blow. For the first time in the entire confrontation, she seemed genuinely shaken, her usual quick wit and sharp tongue failing her. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Johnson straightened up, his massive frame casting a shadow over the entire panel. I came here to talk about a movie, he said, his voice now carrying a note of finality. I came here to have a conversation with professionals. What I found was someone so bitter, so consumed with negativity that she couldn't even let a simple promotional interview happen without trying to tear someone down. He turned to face the cameras directly addressing the audience both in the studio and at home. You know what? I'm done here. I'm done pretending that this kind of toxic behavior deserves a platform. I'm done pretending that Joy Behar's brand of cynicism is anything other than poison. The studio erupted in gasps and murmurs. Johnson had just called out one of television's most established hosts on live television, and everyone knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Behar finally found her voice, but it was shaky and defensive. You can't just walk away from this, Dwayne. You can't just storm off because someone challenged your worldview. Johnson turned back to her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made several people in the studio step back. Watch me, he said simply. He began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled. You want to know what's really challenged here, Joy? It's not my worldview. It's your complete inability to imagine a world where people actually succeed, where dreams actually come true, where hard work actually pays off. As he handed his microphone to a stunned crew member, he continued speaking, his voice carrying across the studio without amplification. I've met thousands of people who've overcome incredible odds. I've seen single mothers work 3 jobs to put themselves through college. I've seen kids from the worst neighborhoods imaginable become doctors, teachers, entrepreneurs. But you know what? None of them would have made it if they'd listened to you. Behar was now standing behind her chair, using it almost like a shield. That's not fair, Dwayne. That's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you're saying, Johnson replied, his voice cutting through her protests. You're saying that hope is a lie, that dreams are fantasies, that people should just accept whatever circumstances they are born into. You're saying that inspiration is irresponsible, and that optimism is naive. He looked around the studio, taking in the faces of the crew, the other hosts, and the audience. Well, I reject that completely. I reject the idea that we should tell people to give up. I reject the idea that honesty means crushing dreams. And I reject the idea that Joy Behar's bitterness should be the final word on what's possible in this world. The other hosts were now looking back and forth between Johnson and Behar like spectators at a tennis match. Whoopi looked like she wanted to say something, but she seemed too stunned to form words. Sarah Haynes was frantically shuffling through her notes, clearly trying to find some way to salvage the situation. Johnson began walking toward the exit, but he stopped and turned back one final time. You know what the saddest part of all this is, Joy? The saddest part is that you probably had dreams once, too. You probably believed in something once, and somewhere along the way, you gave up on those dreams, and now you can't stand to see anyone else holding on to theirs. The words hung in the air like a final judgment, and for a moment, Behar looked genuinely hurt, as if Johnson had found the one thing that could actually wound her. But she quickly recovered, her voice becoming shrill and defensive. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, Dwayne Johnson. Don't you dare pretend like you know anything about my life or my dreams. But Johnson was already at the studio exit, his hand on the door. He turned back one last time, his voice now calm and measured. I don't need to pretend. Joy, everything I need to know about you, you've shown me in the last 20 minutes. You've shown everyone watching exactly who you are. And with that, he pushed through the door and disappeared, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and one of the most explosive television moments in recent memory. The camera lingered on Behar's face, capturing every emotion that flickered across her features: shock, anger, hurt, and something that might have been shame. The other hosts sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to proceed or what to say next. Finally, Whoopi cleared her throat and looked directly into the camera. Well, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll be right back after this commercial break. But everyone knew that there would be no coming back from what had just happened. The interview was over, the damage was done, and the internet was already exploding with clips, reactions, and commentary about the moment when Dwayne Johnson finally lost his cool. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity completely lose it like this during a live interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity moments that you won't see anywhere.